welcome to my new studio space!
Whoops, forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ash.
Today I'm working on the backdrop for this scene. It's going to be a mossy, ferny rock outcrop, heavily inspired by the limestone outcrops in my region.
Rocks. I made the cliffs in the base before I felt decent about sculpting in the XPS foam, but I used the offcuts from the base to make this beetle. Now, full of hubris, I'm ready to sculpt this entire backdrop.
This is supposed to be a really straightforward project, so I'm excited to see how much I can complicate it. I started with a sketch that I'm planning to fully ignore, and now
Let's take the scene down and lay out some guides for these rock layers. I need to dig out this part where the base is gonna sit. Plot needs to happen here, so I need to trace this out and save it for later. I use the thickness of the foam to determine the height of my major bed so I can add extra pieces to it later as lazy as possible.
So if you're ever trying to do something across a panel that's too long for your ruler or your T-square, you can put your T-square on, point it in the direction you want, and then use your ruler on top of the T-square.
These line up like so, and here we are.
A set of blades that I've had for a million years and are probably all dull and rusted.
But I've also got a few good ones in my stash. A fresh blade makes so much difference. Cutting along these lines will help me keep the carving from one area from breaking into another one. Between my razor blade scalpels and these wood carving tools, this won't be so bad, right? So these bits I want to be some shaly muddy stone, and they're just straightforward gouged out.
Ugh. Moral of story, this is going to suck and be very messy, so I'm gonna go get my vacuum cleaner right away, and I'm gonna do this whole thing next to my vacuum cleaner.
But carving for a while hurts, so I try to go gently to spare my wrist, but I still get a blister from these tools relatively fast. In real life, these carbonate parts are more resistant and stick out more in the cliff, while the mudstone parts erode easier and are more recessed. So I test some different ways to carve these rocks. I made 3 test options. The bottom one is my favorite, but it's impractical to cut, so I'll use a combination of the other 2. There's also this shiny bit on the foam that I don't want to be there. That slick surface will leave a different texture under paint than the rest of the foam, so I'm just going to painstakingly slice it all off. When I finally do the carving, it's not too bad. With the shaly bits cut out, I can cut along from an angle and carve out these nice rock bits. As a nice diversion, I've cut out the bits where the ground fits into the backdrop. I have to deal with the rest of this eventually, but for now, I'm just gonna enjoy this success. I don't want the wall to feel completely flat, so I carve out some ledges that I'll be able to attach later. This is the only footage of me carving the carbonate parts. Some of the scraps from the bottom are also the perfect thickness for some of these smaller bits. And then I put the carving off by planning some more. At this point I have to make a decision. I'll show you. So I've textured this part of the outcrop and it looks good, but this part here is really flat. So either I keep it like that, which we all know how likely it is that I'm going to keep something I'm unhappy with, or I'm going to cut into it in sections and try and telescope them outward and use these sticks to stabilize them in place. So let's just get started. Well, in this video, I learned not to leave my camera on autofocus. After many hours, it looks exactly the same and it's time for the other side. I can just barely see the lines from the other side. This is the same color as my skin and looks suspiciously like an unaliving. Once I finish cutting around, it's the satisfying bit. I carefully segment the chunk. I don't think I'm going to do this in more than 2 spots. I offset the toothpicks higher or lower in the beds, depending on where I want the next layer to sit. Right here. That wasn't even so bad. When I've got my pieces to add here and there, they'll block off the weird bits. Just knock off the corners. As a channel first, this took less time than I thought it would. You may ask me why I'm going through all the effort of making this. Valid question. I'm a sucker for a laterally continuous carbonate section. Who isn't? Here. The first one Part 2! Smaller, but so cute! Okay, I have no more excuse. I have to actually begin carving the rest of this, so let's go. I need a distraction. It's a nice carbonate rock that I found in the garden. It's in the ballpark of 170 million years old, and it's going to teach my backdrop the finer points of texture. This area here is where plot will happen, so it needs to have a hole. I cut it out and make sure that it can still go back in. Now I need to fill this joint. It took me forever to figure out what joint compound was called in France, and if this isn't right, that's too bad.
That's weird. It's like cheesy.
The wooden knife really adds to the spreadable cheese vibes, gotta say.
I got really distracted here and just left the room, and when I came back it was dry.
So quickly, before someone notices and I get sent to crafter jail, I'm adding some more goop and I'm stippling it. Hiding the crimes is valid.
This poor brush gets all the abuse from my polymer clay, latex, and now joint compound. Now I finally start dealing with the elephant in the room and the rest of all this uncarved space. Here I'm putting the pain in painstaking. Okay, we're almost there. The actual last edge was the easiest to carve, basically a tree. This took me over a week, but I took many breaks to spare my wrist. Okay, it's actually done shaping now.
Thank you for your service. Huh.
I'm just gonna take a second and pat myself on the back because this thing is really huge. Now it's time to paint it, and past me had some ideas about the color.
I'm gonna try and color match it to the felt and to the cliff face that I've already made.
It's time for a base coat. Nothing too exciting. Of course, I changed my mind several times and go with some kind of yellowish greenish tan. Lucky we're in a heat wave right now, and so I can take it out to dry. While it dries, I can finally start on some of the really fun stuff.
So I'm about to go out and take a bunch of leaf pictures, and I realize I might have a thing for leaves.
Not so much a leaf problem as a leaf style? Haha, leaf life. I go into the garden and get some photos of some simple ferns. I'm going to pick these Asplenium, or bird's nest ferns. A quick trace and a simplify, and I can chuck them in my Cricut. And then for a change, I use some markers on the leaves. I use some water to soften the marker lines and kind of figure out the process until I end up with something I like. Then I batch process the rest. I'd love to try alcohol markers one day, but until then, these cheapy ones are fine.
A fully flat leaf is a sad leaf, so let's fix that.
These ferns have a fold in the middle and a midrib, and the edges of the leaves point upwards, and they have a lovely wrinkled look to them, so I fold them along my nails.
Wow, this is bad footage.
And then fold them again and scrunch them before hot gluing them to a bit of wire.
Well, I left the camera on autofocus, so this footage is useless. Wow! Now I can paint those more resistant carbonate beds. I go for a color that's just peachy. Although it's a hot day, I still have to wait for it to dry all the way, and this is the hardest part. An intolerable length of time measured only in minutes later.
Alright, so now I gotta do a test in camera of color of my felt next to the color of my rock, plus a color of my wash. How close are we? I think we're there. I think we're pretty good.
Then I do a series of color washes because I couldn't commit to something so beige.
Looks like a bit like ketchup and mustard. Ooh, that one was not wet enough, huh? Knock it back a bit. Absorb some of the excess.
And then of course some mossy stuff. Again, while it's drying, it's leaf time, or would be.
A story in 6 words.
The Cricut software requires an internet connection.
This is the kind of thing that happens when my internet runs out. I had some leftover paint, and now I've painted my desk. It's real pretty. Yeah. It's yellow here.
Now I'm out of internet purgatory and I can get back to work.
I'm spending my evening gluing all these little ferns onto wire bits in prep for later.
Don't worry, the glue gun's on a low temperature setting. Some of you may recognize these ferns from the magical treehouse I made last time. I was really motivated by all your nice comments on that video. If you're enjoying this video too, it really does help me if you like and comment, so thank you. I left the link up here if you haven't already seen it and want to. Alright, let's get back to it. By now the paint is probably dry. Let's see how it's going.
New day. She is dry and colorful.
Time for a dark wash.
Okay, so I'm either really dumb or a genius. I'm gonna try and just spray it on using the sprayer.
I can't believe that actually worked.
Paint job complete. I'm really pleased. I think it's great.
I also want to add a little tree to the outcrop, so I make a basic wire tree by twisting together several strands.
And now to add little leaf branches, but not make the stem thicker, because I want this to stay relatively thin and look like a little young tree. I'm taking a piece of wire, fold the two ends together, fold it in half roughly, squeeze that end shut, and then I open it up with just whatever this tool is, put it over the branch of the tree, bring it all the way into the base, and then hold it there, give it a twist, open it up fully, and now I'm going to kind of braid it to make it stay. So I'm going to put the middle branch through the middle, folding the branches over each other. Okay, now it's nice and sturdy.
And then keep going until all the branches look relatively full.
Ta-da! I only poked myself 10,000 times, but it's actually not bad.
Once it's assembled, I use tacky glue to soften the twisted texture.
I'll be honest, this is the first time I'm using tacky glue. Into a bit of foam core and wait for later. Okay, so with my test, it's looking pretty good. There's a few parts where the drying left a bit of a bubble or a blob, and there's a few places where the branches don't come out super cleanly, but it's overall pretty nice.
It doesn't completely get rid of the bumps, but it's good enough. I'm gonna put a little more in the gaps I missed the first time and then call it good.
Then I made it a ridiculous number of little leaves. I spared you the footage of me just sticking leaves on one at a time because I lost it. Next I add 2 kinds of ferns.
Blended turf.
Great. I use normal PVA to stick on the blended turf, and then it looks mossy. The wires on the end of the leaves work better than I thought to push into the foam.
But it still takes some focus to stick them all in one at a time.
Grant me patience. Oh, they're holding on so well. Look at all those little leaves. Those leaves. I might, paint them a little bit more because they're very green, but we'll deal with this in the future. Okay.
Then I get back to poking in far too many ferns, but never enough. I add in the little tree and then use toothpicks to attach the base. Because my single-sided toothpicks were closer to me at the moment, I'm poking pilot holes and then snapping off the fancy ends before I shove the back on. Then I add a little more support. And now it's done! Let's see how it looks! I like it very much. I'm excited to get animating, but not yet. And I'll see you in the next video. Like, subscribe, bell, all the things. Bye!